Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope everybody's having a great day so far today. This video is going to kick off a review series of sorts for some Tom Atkins movies I want to bring up and discuss, because Tom Atkins is one of my favorite Hollywood leading men of all time. Now, his career hasn't done him the greatest justice, but no matter what he's in, the Atkins is always phenomenal. And I want to discuss some of my favorite movies. Now, I will be sprinkling some other movies that I've watched in between some of these Tom Atkins movie reviews, just so I don't get, a little too ahead of myself, because some movies I kind of want to save for down the road. But this one I kind of want to go ahead and get out the way, because it's a standalone in its own franchise for one, and you don't really need to discuss it when we're talking about this franchise with those other movies. But at the same time, this is one of my all-time favorite horror movies ever made, one of my all-time favorite films ever made, period. And in my opinion, one of the 5 horror movies I think are genuine masterpieces. And we're going to be discussing 1982's Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Now, whenever you see a 4K copy from me on my channel, that means that I absolutely love these films. And that should be automatic on the thumbnail. Take my recommendation and watch this movie. But yeah, I have the collector's edition from Scream Factory. I bought this, I think, for a Christmas gift for myself this past Christmas, just because I've wanted this movie on 4K ever since I heard about it. It's sold out, and I had to go on eBay and buy a copy. Good thing I had eBay gift cards, but look at the art on this. I mean, you see the skull, the witch, and the pumpkin mask, and you see the silver shamrock factory in the background. The art of this looks amazing. And on the 4K itself, I switched to the classic art that you might recognize on my thumbnail, this old Season of the Witch icon that I just absolutely love. But that goes without saying. This film came out in 1982, and it came out around the height of the Halloween franchise fandom that came around after the release of Halloween 2. Universal wanted to greenlit a Halloween ongoing series. Now, the direction for the series, from what I gather, pretty much stemmed down to John Carpenter's hatred of making Halloween 2, and I think a lot of the former people that were on the Halloween 1 project, including Tommy Lee Wallace, who directed this film, wanted to pull away from Halloween 2, and Tommy Lee Wallace did, because he just didn't like the direction the film was going. And we all know what happened as a result because of Halloween 2. It pretty much married the franchise forever to Michael Myers. Now, they didn't know this back in the day, so around 1982, Deborah Hill, high on the success of Halloween 2, wanted to make a Halloween 3, but they didn't want to do any more Michael Myers movies. At that point, Michael Myers was killed off. So they reached out to Tommy Lee Wallace, I think she personally did, and asked him if he wanted to do a Halloween 3, but this time they're going to go in an anthological route. And the idea seemed to be that each and every year throughout the 1980s, they wanted to do a Halloween-centered movie every single year, themed around the holiday, and have it be its own standalone idea, potentially with some sequels here and there for some that deserved it, but for the most part, standalone movies. Now, John Carpenter reached out to this guy named Nigel Neal, who was famous on working on British science fiction horror. He did mainly television work, and John Carpenter was fascinated by this guy's work and asked him to write a script based on Deborah Hill's idea of witchcraft in the computer age that was emerging in the early 1980s. And Nigel Neal turned in this draft, and Tommy Lee Wallace and John Carpenter were taken back by how dark and moody the script was, and they pretty much discuss it here in the making of documentary that's included on this 4K here. But get the gist. John Carpenter edited the script, and then Tommy Lee Wallace made further edits. So when you see the credits on this film, it's not just written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. It was Nigel Neal, John Carpenter, and Tommy Lee Wallace's contributions to the script. So all 3 of them wrote this movie. in some capacity. But majority of it is Nigel Neal's original script. Now, the makeup effects go to Tom Berman, who also had their own special featurette I watched on here. And Tom Berman, we'll get into him later, but you'll see what makes this movie so great and so spectacular. I think a lot of his work and his involvement had a lot to do with that. Now, with that being said, what makes Halloween 3 an iconic movie to me? Well, my nostalgia goes back many, many years to this film. I remember I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and my uncle had taken us out to a video rental store. It was like a mom and pop place where I grew up, and they didn't have the biggest selection of movies that we would like kids movies. But my uncle, I remember he rented this film, and he went to go put it on. It was around September or October. I remember because it was some fall banquet thing we went to the week prior, and then we happened to stay over at my uncle's house for the weekend, me and my sister and my brother. And he had rented this movie, and he had put it on, and he asked me if I wanted to watch it with him. And I sat down and watched it with him, and I fell in love with this movie almost immediately. I probably should not have watched this movie at a young age, but I immediately became a lifelong fan. And every year when this movie would air on AMC, you know, the 31 Night Horror Fest, whatever it was called, whenever this movie aired, when I had DVR, I would DVR it. I think I had a DVD of it at some point. I remember when Scream Factory released the original Blu-ray they did, and I wanted it so bad, but I still had that old, I think it was Echo Bridge or Anchor Bay's Halloween 3 DVD, so I never got it. But at some point I had to get a 4K of this because I just absolutely love this movie. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Very rarely do you get something that's rooted in mysticism, back to the Celtic, heritage, the Gaelic heritage of Samhain and how the festivities of Halloween became a thing. It's rooted in supernatural witchcraft and science fiction, and has this fantasy element to it that when you put it into a blender, it makes no sense on paper, and when you're reading it, you might be like, this should not work. But on film, Tommy Lee Wallace, I think, turned in the best thing ever with John Carpenter's name attached to it, other than 1982's The Thing, in my opinion. And some people might be like, oh, the original Halloween's a masterpiece too. It is in its own right. But I think the legacy of that film impacts the opinion of that movie more so than I think the actual quality reflects the legacy of The Thing and Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Now, I think Irwin Yablans kind of said it best. He had nothing involved with this movie. He just took the paycheck and he thought it was a dumb idea to insert it in the Halloween franchise. I agree as well. I think this movie, I think Dean Cundey actually said it. He thinks that if it was advertised as just a standalone film without the Halloween name in it, it perhaps could have done way better. And that's the unfortunate side effect. If I can go, we can all go back in time. I wish that we would stress that John Carpenter and Deborah Hill to maybe try to reconsider the negotiations with Universal on Halloween 2. They probably wanted another Michael Myers movie, but they could have postponed that and done something else kind of in between to kind of show the fans that this isn't just a Michael Myers franchise. And maybe it would have flopped in the water at Halloween 2, but at least they could have tried that. Or maybe it could have succeeded and we could have got an alternate reality where we got an anthology movie every Halloween instead of just trying to repeat the success with Michael Myers over and over again and just failing miserably with all these different reboots and timelines that we ended up getting. But getting way out of myself, I kind of want to talk about the plot synopsis of this movie because it is very weird and very unique, and it's one of a kind in a lot of ways. So, the story starts off with this man. He's running away from these people dressed in suits in a car. He ends up in a junkyard, and he gets cornered by a few of them. A couple of the men in the suits die or get, seemingly taken out by some things in the junkyard. And time goes by, and he ends up about an hour later, after being on the run for so long, he ends up at this gas station of sorts or some service station, and he has this mask on him with this logo on the back that says Silver Shamrock Novelties, and it's like pumpkin mask. And the man at the service station doesn't know what to do, so he calls an ambulance. The guy gets taken to the hospital, and then we get introduced to the main character of the story named Dr. Don Chalice, who's played by the legendary Tom Atkins. And he and his wife, I don't know if they're together in the movie or they're divorced. I think it's implied that they're divorced, but he's there trying to, I guess, spend some time with his kids. He just gotten home from a long day, and he gets a call to come in because he's the only doctor on duty for this type of stuff. He needs to come in and check out this guy that they just brought in. So he leaves his family and he goes back to the hospital, and at the hospital he notices the guy, and the guy seems delirious and something's not right with him. And throughout the rest of the hospital portion, he's trying to catch up on some sleep, but he hears some funny noises. Some men with some suits might come in and handle the man that we saw earlier in the movie, and he ends up getting killed, right? So Dr. Chalice is kind of shaken up. He thinks something is wrong here, something to do with the mask. There was a warning that the doctor was told by this man. And he meets the man's daughter, played by the legendary Stacey Nelkin, and her name is Ellie. And she is taken back by her father's death, but might have some information as to why this happened. And she feels like she can't go to the police, but Dr. Chalice thinks that she's physically attractive and kind of offers to help her. So he and her, there's a couple of day gap between the events of her father's death and them meeting up, actually. I should kind of mention that here. The whole film takes place over the course of 8 days, right? Starts on the 23rd and it ends on the 31st. Well, after a few days, they end up getting together and kind of investigating what happened to her father. And she takes him to this mask shop that he used to own, and it has all these silver shamrock masks in there. And she seems to think that he was on a visit to where the masks are made in Santa Mira, California, and something happened to him on the way back from Santa Mira to the town that they live in. And since she's out of town, since she lives at a different city in LA, she's not gonna go back to LA until she figures out what happened to her dad, and she feels like the people at the Silver Shamrock factory might have some answers. So the two of them then go on a joyride for a few days to end up in Santa Mira, California. Now, Dr. Don Chalice is an anti-hero of the film, so you have to know this, but his primary motive behind helping her is that he'll get to end up being with her, right? And that may or may not happen. And while in Santa Mira and throughout the movie, you get this wild sense about these people in suits, like what are they, what potentially is the origin behind them. And once you get to Santa Mira and you meet the person behind the mask factory, named Connell Cochran, played by the legendary Dan O'Herlihy, you get a sense that something might be wrong, and the movie then goes into a wild plot dealing with, let's just say, robotics, Celtic ritual, and black magic. There's some things dealing with the Stonehenge monument that's dropped on news hints in the beginning of the movie as well. And there's some sinister plot to be done on Halloween night, potentially. And now Dr. Don Chalice has to essentially be the anti-hero and save everyone from what's about to happen. And I'm not going to go into any further about specifics. There are some plot twists dealing with some certain characters that some fans seem to be kind of iffy on, but I'll touch on them in a minute. But that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Like I said, on paper, this movie should not work, but it surprisingly does. And I think I want to tip my hat to Tom Berman first. The kills in this movie, I guess the deaths and the wild practical effects that were used were absolutely incredible. There's scenes where you see a guy's skull pop out of his eye sockets, like a piece of his nose bone. You see a guy pour gasoline on himself, and there might be an explosion that entails with that. There's a scene where you see the Dick Warlock, who played Michael Myers in Halloween 2, rip a guy's head off. Like, some of these kills are freaking phenomenal, dude. And the whole robotics angle, too, it could be kind of hokey. It depends on your taste, but I think that stuff was done brilliantly. And it kind of alludes that they're kind of cyborgs. And that also entails with a plot twist of a character, but I'll get into that in just a minute. But the effects on this movie look spectacular. And I'm also going to give a compliment to Tommy Lee Wallace here as an overall compliment. Tommy Lee Wallace is a very amazing technical director. And one of his other movies that I think kind of showcases his talent other than this is Fright Night 2, the underrated sequel from the original Fright Night movie of the 1980s. A lot of people don't give that movie the credit it deserves, especially for Wallace's work there. But a lot of his filming dynamicism that he's able to bring replicates what John Carpenter was doing with the type of cameras that he used for the original Halloween 1 and 2. The same cameras are used here, and it honestly feels like John Carpenter himself directed this. Like, if somebody said that John Carpenter directed this movie and not Tommy Lee Wallace, I would believe that. And that's how well he made this film. Everything down to some chase sequences, down to the angles. I think Dean Cundy helped with the direction of the photography here, so I think that's kind of a lot of his attrition too. But the way he was able to capture this story is just so special. He was able to capture what Halloween is in a lot of the best ways. Yeah, you don't see trick-or-treating or anything in this film. You don't see a small town, per se, actively trick-or-treating, but you do see kids dressed up in these silver shamrock masks going out, preparing to go trick-or-treating. And I think a lot of what this movie kind of captures in tone is because of him capturing, like, thinking about capturing a novelty shop and about kids getting excited when they go into a novelty shop and finding masks to wear for Halloween. It's just the simplicity of it. And the locations they picked. I just give a round of applause to how well Wallace was able to orchestrate this film and all the effects departments and all the set designers that worked on this, because this was outstanding. The writing of this movie might very well be some of the more creative writing I've ever seen in film history. I mean, Nigel Neal, I don't know much about his work, but I'm a massive fan of this movie that he's really uncredited to, unfortunately. And hearing the backstory about why he never really wrote screenplays for Hollywood, even though he was asked by a bunch because people loved his work, but he felt like Hollywood always diluted his material. And it's kind of the same way here. Tommy Lee Wallace and John Carpenter did make edits to his movie, and he was not happy about that whatsoever. And it is what it is, but if majority of this movie is his idea, like Wallace said, I think he did a phenomenal job, and I would love to know what other movies he did, because I want to try him out, because what this movie blended, like the whole fantasy element, the science fiction, the Halloween aesthetic to it all, computers, ancient Celtic, mythology. It's just a blender of a movie. And it makes me want to, get inspired by his creativeness, because this is just a really original film. The closest thing, and even Tommy Lee Wallace kind of pointed this out, the closest thing this movie kind of feels like is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But that's even a stretch. So, yeah. Very original film. And that goes down to the actors, too. If it's not the very well-madeness to this film, the good writing, it's the acting. Tom Atkins, I think, turns in his best performance of any movie of all time. I mean, his performance as Dr. John Chalice is immortalized to me. He was pretty much doing some action work in this film, too. But the way he delivers lines, and he has just some really iconic moments in this film where, you get the sense of he's living with this knowledge, because at some point he gets to learn what's really going on at the Shamrock Factory. And you can tell that he's torn, because he's probably thinking about his kids. He's thinking about all the other parents with kids out there and all the families that are going to be affected by this psychopath and a bunch of psychopaths running this mask shop. It's so believable. And not to mention, his character is probably one of the greatest anti-hero characters of all time in film. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't like the guy. He's kind of a pompous dick. He's kind of a chauvinist in some ways. But he comes around in the film, and like he develops real feelings for this girl named Ellie. Now, like I said, the consternation, is he cheating on his wife, or is he actually divorced from her? I can't really tell you. I think the film is like purposely vague on that. I think majority of the fan base thinks that he's cheating on his wife, which makes sense because of how he's trying to constantly cover up by calling her. But then again, if he's divorced, I don't see how much that helps. But I guess it does if you think that's bad taste. But he's just a really complex character, and I really enjoy him. Ellie, Stacey Nelkin, I think did a phenomenal job with this character. She's very rootable. She's a sweetheart. She's far too young to be with Dr. Chalice, and that part of the film just seems kind of weird to me. It always has been. I don't full-on hate it or anything. I just think that's just kind of bizarre. But it works because the two of them are so honest with each other and they get close. Now, Dr. Chalice might be only trying to help her so he can like get with her, but I think that she brings out some qualities in him that make him care near the end of the film. I think without her, he would have been just a selfish person, and he kind of is, but he kind of evolved to not think about himself so much, given the situation that he's thrown to in the movie. And Ellie, she's a conundrum herself. And there's a twist involving her character. There's a couple twists involving some characters in this movie. But the most controversial one, I think most people that find this movie incredible have one drawback with the movie, and it's her twist. I'm not going to spoil what it is. But this twist, I think, makes sense because of a certain portion of the movie she was made inactive because something happens to her. And during this portion is where I think this twist happened. I don't think that she was like this the whole movie, and I'm just going to leave it like that. But, yeah, that's the only divisive point of the whole film. Like, where did this come from? But there's enough there to think back on the context, and it makes sense in the right frame of mind about it. And that's how I think about it. So it makes sense to me. But Dan O'Herlihy, who plays Connell Cochran, steals the show when he's on screen, man. This man made one of my favorite movie villains of all time. And, you know, I'm a superhero nerd. I love all types of media with villains in it. But Connell Cochran, this might be my spoiler, but not really. This movie's like over 40 years old. How can you spoil it? But this movie has one of the greatest movie villains ever, in my opinion. Especially when you hear his backstory and you get a taste of it. You don't really get the most fleshed out thing ever, but there's enough to understand the true magnitude of what this motherfucker's about. He is the pure embodiment of evil. He's the pure understanding of Samhain and what makes the Halloween lore and the history of Halloween so rich and so memorable in I guess pop culture's minds. He understands the deep richness and the history behind it, and that goes into his sinister plot, which is absolutely batshit and creative as hell. And he has like some workers that work for him, which kind of is a blend of these people of Santa Mira that live in the town, and also seemingly people that have been roboticized. If that makes any sense. It's just absolutely fucking wild what this guy has planned. And it's memorable. And it makes this movie a Halloween staple every year, because it's what he's able to do is he's able to strike fear into the hearts of probably a lot of younger kids watching this, but it's still so effective because it just pulls on that naivety we all had as kids about, you know, wearing Halloween masks and not really knowing what we're doing, but we're having fun doing it. And there's some type of there's a predator lurking where you least expect it aspect to wearing a Halloween mask and stuff that just gets to you a little bit, and it gets you on a more surreal level than most movies would. And the last thing I want to bring up, kind of stemming into all this, with all the greatness that this movie has, the music, I think, is one of my favorite John Carpenter collections of songs he's ever put together. I mean, Cherry to the Pumpkins is one of my favorite movie songs of all time. Yes, if we're getting into the limerick of London Bridge is Falling Down being retooled as the song for the Silver Shamrock commercial, people have said that gets annoying and it's throughout the whole movie, but tell me that's not a good rendition of London Bridge is Falling Down. Tell me that does not stick in your head for better or for worse. And tell me that does not make you creeped out as the movie keeps going on and as the volume keeps getting louder and how they keep distorting parts of the song at certain scenes of the movie. Tell me that's not scary. Tell me that it does not add to the effect. But other than that theme song, the synthness in the early 80s-ness to this soundtrack is absolutely breathtaking. And I don't know, just packaged all together, it just makes a fantastic film. Yes, it has its comedic moments too. It has its over-the-top moments. I think a lot of the comedic moments has to deal with the family of characters that visit Santa Mira, and you get to meet the little boy and the mom and dad that are just very eccentric. And there's some, weird music played with them, but they're there for comic relief. There's some funny jokes with them throughout when they are in the film. And there are some over-the-top things that might make you laugh and just be like, what the fuck did I just watch? But don't take it like it's like B-movie stuff. It's B-movie stuff in an A-movie. And it just sticks out like it's just great. It's nothing to be eye-wincing at or upset with, in my opinion. Everything about this film works, down to the ending, which I think has one of the best endings to a horror movie of all time. Tell me that the ending of this film is not good. I'm just saying. I mean, it's just so memorable in so many ways. And I've read fan fictions on what happens. And there's a lot of different avenues that people have gone down. And I think there is one that involves the commercial potentially not working, and Chalice pretty much gets a sequel out of this. I would have loved to see a season of The Witch 2 with that idea that this fanfic wrote, because it just sounded so good. That's me personally, but as a standalone film, and as the documentary called Creating a Standalone, this is fantastic. And that's why I feel okay talking about this outside of the Michael Myers franchise. He's only mentioned in some commercials here, and the original Halloween theme song is actually played in this movie because there's a TV turned on that is playing the original Halloween film in the background, and there's some meta nods to that original movie, and kind of creating some mild continuity into the next, movies after it. And I think Scream kind of took a nod from that when they made when Wes Craven made Scream in 1996. This film is just so powerful, and it's one of the staple Halloween movies. If you're not watching Halloween 3 Season of the Witch every Halloween, or at least 1 or 2 times a year, just randomly when you feel like watching it, you're really missing out. And the 4K transfer of this film is absolutely breathtaking. Even the Blu-ray transfer, which Scream Factory's had out for years, looks immaculate too. But the 4K is well worth the money. Go out and get this. This is a fantastic movie. I think this is it's a masterpiece to me. It just screams ingenuity. It screams originality. And in an age where everything is trying to replicate something else or trying to capture what made something else successful, I just can't help but praise this movie more. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'll easily give this a 5 out of 5. I think this is a genuine perfect film from start to finish. A perfect movie. So that's my thoughts on Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this? Do you hate this? Let me know. And I'll see you next time.